I can still feel that moment, the sting, the silence, the shame. It happened on a Thursday night, the night I thought I was saving my family. My dining table was set perfectly, just the way my late husband liked it. The silver cutlery polished, the candles flickering against the glass, the smell of roast chicken filling the room. I had spent all day cooking, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I thought maybe if I showed a little more love, a little more patience, my son would see the woman who raised him, not the burden his fiancé made me out to be. She sat across from me, her lips curled in that same quiet smirk she always wore, the kind that said, "You're nothing here anymore." My son, Michael, sat beside her, eyes glued to his plate, barely speaking. I tried to start gentle conversation, but every word I spoke seemed to float into the air and die between us. Still I smiled. Still I hoped. Because that's what mothers do. We hope, even when the room is suffocating with unspoken truths. Then I asked the question that shattered it all. "Michael," I said softly, "did the inheritance check from your father's account arrive yet?" The bank said it was cleared last week. The fork in her hand froze midair. She looked at me with that sharp, glassy stare. And before I could even process what was happening, she leaned forward and spat right into my face. The sound of it, that wet, humiliating slap against my skin, echoed through the room louder than any scream. My breath caught. The taste of salt and bitterness burned my lips. My son's chair scraped backward, but he didn't say a word. Not one. He didn't even look at me. In that instant, something inside me, something years of sacrifice had built, cracked. The woman who had worked 3 jobs to pay his tuition, who had sold her wedding bangles to help them buy that house, who had fed their child while they went on holidays. She died a little that night. I wiped my face slowly. My hands were trembling, but my voice wasn't. I stood up, and everything went quiet. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering. "You can take everything I gave," I said, my voice steady and low. "But you'll never take my dignity." No one moved. My daughter-in-law's eyes widened just for a second. And Michael, he still didn't look up. That silence, that heavy, suffocating silence, said everything I needed to know. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't as naive as they thought. For weeks, I'd felt something was wrong. Strange bank withdrawals, whispered phone calls, missing documents. So before that dinner, I had placed a small recorder beneath the table. Every word, every insult, every lie they'd whispered that night was now safely saved. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about how love turns blind and how betrayal turns it cold. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I didn't. I simply stood there, the same woman who once held him when he cried, now standing like a stranger in her own home. And then she laughed. She actually laughed, wiping her mouth with a napkin as if what she'd done was nothing. "Finally," she said, "you've learned to keep quiet." Her words sliced through me deeper than the spit ever could. I felt my knees go weak, but I didn't let her see me fall. I walked out of that room with my head high, leaving the dinner untouched, leaving behind the people I had loved the most. I wish I could tell you that was the end of it, that my dignity was enough to stop what came next. But it wasn't, because when people like her taste control, they don't stop at humiliation. They want destruction. That night, after everyone left, I replayed the recording on my phone. I heard every word, her mocking tone, her lies, the way she spoke about me as though I were a nuisance to be removed. My heart ached, but my mind began to sharpen. I didn't know it then, but that little device under my table had just become my greatest weapon. Still, I couldn't sleep. The house felt colder than ever. My husband's photo on the wall seemed to watch me, asking silently, "Why are you still letting them hurt you?" And the truth was, I didn't have an answer. Because no matter how much a mother bleeds, she still wants her child to come home. She still waits for him to say, "I'm sorry, Mom." But what happened after that dinner, what she did before the police ever came, nearly cost me everything I had. I used to believe love was unbreakable, especially a mother's love. But the truth is, even the strongest bond can be manipulated, poisoned, and torn apart by someone who knows exactly where your heart lives. After my husband passed away, I made him one promise as I held his trembling hand in the hospital. I'll take care of our boy. I'll make sure he never feels alone. That promise became my purpose. I sold the farmhouse that had been in our family for generations, the one my husband built with his own hands, just to pay for my son's education. Every brick of that house carried memories, laughter, and love. Selling it felt like burying a part of myself, but I told myself it was worth it, because he was my future. When he graduated and told me he wanted to start a small business, I didn't hesitate. I gave him what was left of our savings. I told him, use this to build something good. Your father would be proud. He hugged me, promised to pay me back, promised to visit often. He promised. A year later, he brought her home, the woman who would change everything. Her name was Clara. She was graceful, polite, always smiling at the right time. The kind of woman who knew how to make everyone in the room feel small without ever raising her voice. When she first called me Mom, my heart softened. I thought, maybe this is what healing looks like, a new beginning for all of us. But slowly things began to shift. The phone calls became shorter, the visits fewer. My son stopped bringing her over on weekends. When I called, she would answer with a sigh. He's busy, maybe next week. At first I thought she was just adjusting. Maybe I was being too sensitive. But every time I saw her, her words carried tiny blades hidden beneath her politeness. You shouldn't worry about us so much, Mom, she'd say with that gentle smile. We're not children anymore. One evening, I went to visit them unannounced, carrying homemade soup and a little sweater I'd knitted for their baby girl. Clara opened the door, barely smiled, and blocked the entrance. We really don't need this, she said, her voice icy but calm. We're doing fine on our own. You can keep your... Charity. That word, charity, burned through me. I stood there with the soup cooling in my hands, trying to understand when love had turned into something she was ashamed to accept. My son appeared behind her, eyes tired, avoiding my gaze. Mom, we'll call you later, okay? He murmured. And just like that, the door closed. I drove home that night in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I kept hearing her voice over and over. We don't need your charity. It echoed like a curse. Weeks passed, and I convinced myself it was just a misunderstanding. Families fight, I told myself. They grow apart and come back. But deep down, something inside me was whispering that I was losing my son, not to distance, but to control. Then one morning, while cleaning his old room, the one I never changed after he left, I found something that made my heart stop. A folded piece of paper stuck inside a book he used to love as a child. It was a bank receipt, recent, printed clearly, showing a large withdrawal from my account. My account, and the signature at the bottom wasn't mine. It was his. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe he'd transferred it temporarily for business. But when I saw the line beneath his name, joint account holder Clara, my chest tightened. I felt the air leave my body. My legs gave way, and I had to sit down before I fainted. How could this be? When had he added her name to my account? That night, I didn't confront him. I couldn't. I sat on my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every act of kindness, every gift, every time I said yes when I should have said no. I told myself there had to be an explanation. That's what mothers do. We create excuses for the people we love, even when they're slowly taking everything from us. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my sister, just one line. Why did you sell your land to your son's wife? My fingers went cold. I read it again, certain I was hallucinating. Sell my land? What land? I hadn't sold anything. I called her immediately, my voice shaking. She told me Clara had shown up at her office with signed documents, mine, claiming I had transferred ownership of my remaining property to her as a gift. I felt the blood drain from my face. I told my sister to send a copy, and when I saw the scanned papers, my knees buckled. My signature was there. It looked perfect, identical. But I hadn't signed a thing. I remember sitting on the floor, holding my phone, the world around me spinning. I couldn't breathe. My own son had access to my documents. My own son could have helped her do this. I didn't want to believe it. I refused to believe it. But deep down, I knew the truth. The gentle girl with the smooth voice, the polite smile, had been studying me all along. She knew when I was vulnerable, when I trusted, when I'd look away. That evening, I watched old videos of my son, his first steps, his first day at school, the smile he used to give me when he was proud of himself. I pressed my hand against the screen and whispered, "Where did you go, my boy?" But even as I cried, a new feeling began to form. Quiet at first, then burning stronger with each heartbeat. Anger. Not the kind that screams, but the kind that plans. I realized that if I didn't act, they would take everything. My home, my savings, even my name. For the first time in my life, I felt afraid of my own child. I started checking every drawer, every old folder, every file I had stored over the years. Something inside me was telling me there was more, something I hadn't yet seen. And then, one evening, as the last bit of sunlight slipped through the curtains, I opened his drawer and found the document that changed everything. I remember the night I opened that drawer, my hands trembling, my breath short, as if the air itself had turned thick with dread. I wasn't looking for secrets. I was looking for peace. But instead, I found a document that made my blood run cold, a property transfer deed, my land, and my signature, perfectly copied but completely forged. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at it, every line, every false initial, until my eyes blurred with tears I couldn't stop. My heart kept whispering, "No, this can't be real." But it was. My name had been stolen by the very people I had trusted most. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for what felt like hours. I tried to remember if I'd ever signed something like that. I hadn't. My husband and I had bought that land together, decades ago, with our first savings after he returned from the hospital. He'd told me, "This land is our future, no matter what happens." And now, our future had been signed away, not by strangers, but by my own son and his wife. I took out my phone, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it, and took photos of the deed. Every page, every stamp, every signature. Then I slipped it back into the drawer exactly as I'd found it. I couldn't afford to let them know I'd seen it. That night I barely slept. Every sound in the house made my heart jolt. Every whisper of the wind outside felt like someone plotting in the dark. I told myself maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it was a mistake. But somewhere deep inside, I already knew this wasn't a mistake. 2 days later, I got my confirmation. I was watering the plants outside when I heard her voice through the kitchen window. She was on the phone, calm, almost amused. She said, "Once her pension clears, we'll move it all under your name. She'll never know." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. She wasn't even pretending to hide it anymore. The woman I'd once called daughter was plotting to erase me completely, financially, legally, and even emotionally. I froze. I didn't want her to see me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I quietly stepped back, clutching the watering can like it was my only defense. And in that moment, something inside me changed. Fear turned into something sharper. Not anger, but clarity. I realized if I didn't protect myself now, I'd lose not just what I owned, but who I was. That evening, I put on my calmest face and acted like nothing had happened. I cooked dinner. I asked them how their day was. I smiled when she smiled. And when my son kissed my forehead before bed, I forced myself not to cry, but inside I made a silent vow. This ends with truth. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not from home, of course. I took a long walk to the post office and used their public phone. I remember whispering, as if the walls might be listening. I told him I suspected forgery and financial fraud. He told me to come in discreetly, bring anything I had. I felt both terrified and relieved. Terrified because this meant everything I feared was true, but relieved because finally, someone was on my side. When I met him, he was a quiet man with kind eyes. He listened without interrupting. When I showed him the photos, he sighed and said softly, "Ma'am, this isn't just forgery. It's premeditated." He explained how they might have used my documents, how signatures can be replicated, how power of attorney can be twisted when trust is blind. I felt sick. I thought about every time I'd handed her an envelope, every time I'd said, "You handle it, dear. I trust you." That trust had become my biggest mistake. I started keeping notes, dates, conversations, even her tone when she spoke about money. I placed my phone on record during dinners, pretending to check messages. The first few nights, nothing. But then one evening, she let her mask slip. She laughed to someone on the phone and said, "She still thinks she has control. Poor thing." I remember my fork falling from my hand, the metallic sound slicing through the silence of the room. My son asked if I was okay. I smiled and said, "Just tired." But inside, my heart was breaking piece by piece. What would you do? If your own child stood by while his wife destroyed everything you built, would you still hope he'd wake up one day and see the truth? I kept asking myself that question every night, but the more I waited, the more distant he became. He started repeating her words, subtle, poisonous ones. "Mom, you forget things these days. Mom, you're overthinking again. Mom, maybe you should rest." Those weren't his words. They were hers, dripping from his mouth like venom. And then one day, the poison spread outside the house. My neighbor, Mrs. Thomas, stopped me on my way to the market. She looked uncomfortable and said, "Dear, is it true you're not well? That you've been forgetting things?" I froze. That's when I realized they were telling people I had dementia. That way, if I ever accused them of anything, no one would believe me. They weren't just stealing from me. They were erasing me. I smiled weakly at Mrs. Thomas and said, "Don't worry, dear. My memory is just fine." But when I got home, I sat on my bed and cried like I hadn't cried in years. Not because of the money, but because of the humiliation. The realization that they were building a world where my voice no longer mattered. But even through the tears, a strange calm came over me. I whispered to myself, "If they think I'm weak, let them, because that's how I'll win." From that day, my silence became my shield. I started gathering more, bank statements, messages, even small slips of paper from drawers and bags. Each piece told a story of greed wrapped in politeness. My lawyer taught me how to preserve digital evidence properly. "You're not powerless," he said. "You're preparing for war." And that's exactly what it felt like. A quiet, invisible war inside my own home. Then came the day that nearly broke me completely. My lawyer called and said, "We found something else. You need to see this." When I arrived, he slid a document across the table, a company registration form. The company name was unfamiliar, but the signature at the bottom was my husband's. The problem? My husband had been dead for 5 years. They had registered a fake company under his name, using my ID as witness. My breath caught in my throat. I remember whispering, "They used the dead to rob the living." For the first time, I felt my knees weaken. I thought I might faint right there. My husband had always been my moral compass, and now his name was being used as part of their crime. I pressed my palms together to stop them from shaking. My lawyer said, "We'll take this to court, but we need more. Something irrefutable." So I kept pretending. Kept smiling. Kept cooking. Kept being the naive old mother they thought they'd fooled. Because I knew every lie eventually collapses under its own weight. But what happened next left even my lawyer speechless. One evening, I came home to find an envelope on the kitchen counter. It had hospital letterhead on it. I opened it slowly, thinking maybe it was about my medical checkup, but the words made me go cold all over. It was a medical report, claiming that I had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia, signed and stamped by a doctor I had never even met. The date on it was forged. The handwriting was hers. That's when I knew. They weren't just stealing my money. They were preparing to have me declared legally incompetent. Once that happened, they could take everything. The house, the savings, even my freedom. My heart pounded as I clutched the paper. I looked around the house, at the photos, the furniture, the memories, and realized I was living in a prison built by my own kindness. But something inside me sparked again. Fear burned away, replaced by something harder, determination. I folded the report, placed it in my bag, and whispered to myself, "Now, it's my turn." Because what they didn't know was that every lie they'd told, every word they'd forged, every mask they'd worn, was already being recorded. But when I saw the hospital report, the one she forged under my name, I knew it was time to fight back. The courtroom smelled like old wood and cold air, the kind of chill that seeps through your bones when you're about to face the truth. I remember sitting there, my palms pressed tightly together, my heartbeat steady but heavy. I had spent months preparing for this day. Every lie I'd endured, every insult I'd swallowed, every tear I'd wiped in silence. It all led here. I told myself I was ready, but when the doors opened and I saw him, my late husband's brother, I felt the world tilt. The man who disappeared after the funeral, the one we all thought had gone abroad, was sitting right there in the front row, and the look he gave me wasn't guilt. It was defiance. In that instant, everything I'd believed about betrayal expanded into something deeper. It wasn't just my son and his wife. It was him. The one my husband trusted with our family's paperwork. The one who'd helped me file pension forms when I could barely stand from grief. My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered, "That's the witness for their defense." I couldn't breathe. My husband's brother, my son's uncle, had been helping them all along. The forged signatures, the fake hospital report, even the property deed. He was the one who made it all possible. When the proceedings began, my lawyer's voice was calm but sharp, every word slicing through the web of deceit they'd woven. He laid out the recordings first, the ones I had secretly made during dinners, late-night whispers, and phone calls. Her voice echoed through the courtroom, clear and cruel. "Once her pension clears, we'll move it all under your name." The sound of it made even the judge glance up. My son's wife didn't blink. She sat there with her hands folded, like a statue carved from ice. Then came the documents, page after page of evidence. My signature, forged again and again. My husband's name used illegally to register a company that never existed. The hospital report, stamped, signed, and completely fabricated. The courtroom was silent except for the flipping of pages. My lawyer's voice didn't waver. "Your Honor," he said, "this was not a mistake. It was an organized betrayal of an elderly widow by her own family." But what happened next broke me more than any forged paper ever could. When the judge asked if the accused had anything to say, my son stood up. His voice was shaking, but he didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, and then, barely above a whisper, he said, "She made me do it, Mom. I just wanted peace." Peace. That word felt like a knife. I wanted to scream, "Peace doesn't come from betrayal." I wanted to ask him if peace was worth selling his mother's name. But no sound came out. I just sat there staring at him, the boy I had raised, the man I had built my life around, watching him crumble before my eyes. The judge's pen scratched against paper. The clerk murmured. The world kept moving, but inside me, time stopped. The cross-examination began. My husband's brother tried to defend himself, claiming he only did what he was told, that he thought I had approved everything. My lawyer presented the voice messages, his own voice coaching her through the forgeries, instructing her how to mimic my handwriting. When it played, he closed his eyes. The courtroom gasped. He didn't even try to deny it. And then it was over. The judge called for silence. I could feel the tension in the air, thick, unbearable. I watched her, my daughter-in-law, her face pale, her eyes darting from one side to another, searching for someone to save her. There was no one left. The verdict came down hard and clear. Fraud, identity theft, defamation, guilty. The properties were to be returned to me. The fake company dissolved. Her sentence was read aloud, each word echoing like the toll of a bell marking the end of something rotten. As the judge finished, my son covered his face with his hands. I could hear his quiet sobs. For a moment, I almost reached out. The mother in me, foolish, stubborn, still wanted to comfort him. But then she turned toward me. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You destroyed your own son." I looked her straight in the eye, my voice steady, my heart bleeding inside, and said, "No, you did." That silence afterward was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. Even the judge paused before dismissing the court. My son didn't look at me again. He walked out without a word, his shoulders bent, his face pale. She was led away by the officers, her heels clicking against the cold floor like the sound of everything she'd taken from me. Leaving. When the gavel fell, I didn't feel victory. There was no joy, no triumph, just the sound of truth settling in the air like dust after a storm. The years of fear, shame, and manipulation had ended. But what remained was grief. A grief not for what I lost, but for what I had to destroy to survive. As I stepped outside the courtroom, the sun hit my face for the first time in what felt like years. Reporters murmured, cameras flashed, people whispered my name. I didn't stop to listen. I just kept walking. My lawyer caught up to me and said softly, "It's over." But I knew it wasn't. Not really. Because freedom isn't peace. Freedom is what you earn after the war ends. But the echoes of that war don't disappear overnight. That night, when I finally went home, to the house that was once filled with laughter and betrayal alike, I found something on my doorstep. A plain white envelope. No name, no return address. I picked it up, my fingers trembling, and walked inside. I sat at the table, the same table where all of this began, and opened it slowly. Inside was a single piece of paper. Just one line, written in familiar handwriting I hadn't seen in years. "You think it's over, but the truth hasn't finished with you yet." And in that moment, I realized peace might still be far away. Because even after justice, some ghosts refuse to stay buried. When I saw the envelope on my doorstep, my first instinct was fear. For months, I had lived in a strange silence. No courtroom, no lawyers, no tears left to shed. Just the hollow sound of my own footsteps in a house that used to feel like a home. The handwriting on the letter stopped me cold. It was his. My son's. The same hand that once scribbled, "I love you, Mom," on birthday cards. Now trembling across this envelope like a ghost reaching out from regret itself. I didn't open it right away. I just held it against my chest, as if by doing that I could delay whatever truth waited inside. But you can't delay truth forever, can you? When I finally tore it open, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The first line read, "I'm sorry, Mom." Simple, unassuming. But those 3 words cut deeper than any accusation ever could. He confessed everything. The pressure, the manipulation, the guilt he carried for choosing them over me. He wrote that he had left the city, that he needed to find himself again. And then, right before the end, one line stood out, carved into my mind like a scar. "You were right. It was never about money. It was about control." I dropped the letter and sobbed like a child, not because I hated him, but because I finally understood him. Every betrayal, every cruel word, every silence between us, it all came from fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being the one who's wrong. And maybe, deep down, fear of me, the mother who refused to stay quiet. I cried for days. I didn't eat. I didn't answer calls. I just let the grief empty me out until there was nothing left to mourn. But one morning, a small voice broke through the silence. "Nana, breakfast?" It was his little boy, my grandson. He stood in the doorway, holding a toy car in one hand and a slice of bread in the other, smiling like the world hadn't fallen apart. And in that smile, I felt something shift. The story didn't end in that courtroom or in that letter. It lived on in this child, innocent, untainted, still calling me Nana, like I was his whole world. I made him breakfast that day, and for the first time in a long time, I felt useful again. Life didn't rush back all at once. Healing never does, but slowly I began to rebuild. I stopped counting what I had lost and started noticing what I still had. Peace, safety, and a purpose. I took half of the money the court had returned to me and donated it to a women's legal aid fund. Women who were still where I once was. Trapped, silenced, made to believe they were powerless. Every time one of them called me, trembling, saying, "I don't know what to do," I would tell them, "You start by believing you deserve better." It wasn't easy to relive the pain while helping others. Some nights I'd wake up sweating, remembering the shouting, the humiliation, the lies. But then I'd remember that letter, those final words, and realize that maybe the only way to win was not revenge, but release. I didn't forgive him right away. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a wound that decides one day to stop bleeding, and in my case, that day took years. People often ask me, Would you forgive a betrayal if it came from your own child? I used to think the answer was no, but the truth is more complicated. Forgiveness isn't approval, it's freedom, and freedom is something I had spent my entire life chasing. So yes, I forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. Now, every year, on that same Thursday, the day everything fell apart, I cook dinner alone. The same dish I made the night my world broke open. But now it tastes different. There's no bitterness in the air, no tension hiding behind the clatter of plates. Just peace. Sometimes I even set an extra plate across from me. Not for him, but for the memory of who I used to be. The woman who survived. The woman who learned that you can lose everything and still find yourself again. And sometimes, when my grandson runs in laughing, I catch myself whispering, "It's over." Because in a way, it is. The shame that once chained me became my strength. The silence that used to choke me became my voice. And the pain that once defined me became the reason other women found their way out too. So if you've ever been betrayed by your own blood, remember this. You are not powerless. You are not broken beyond repair. You are proof that survival is louder than betrayal. And that one day, when the noise finally fades, you'll find yourself standing in the quiet, realizing that peace doesn't come from winning, it comes from letting go. And that's when I learned the truth. Freedom is the greatest inheritance.